Welcome to the discussion, everybody. In this discussion, we're going to talk about XML files, data types, how databases differ between flat files, and so a lot of different topics going on. And so let's kind of start with data types. And so a long time ago, I had a course with Grady Booch, and he is the father of object-oriented design. And he said a data type tells us two things. First is the set of values that a variable or a field in a database can store. And the second is a set of operations that can be performed on that variable. And so we know, for example, that integers store numbers -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Character strings hold a sequence of ASCII or Unicode characters. Floating point numbers have a number with a decimal point, 3.1415, and so on. And so we know that, okay, the data type is specifying the value, but now let's think about set operations that also get specified. It makes sense to add two integer values. It makes sense to multiply two floating point values, but it doesn't make sense to multiply two character string values, such as two address strings. That make no sense. And so the data type, in addition to defining the set of values, also defines the set of operations. Now, there's a lot of different ways to store data, and which do you think is the most widely used database in the world? And if you guessed Excel, you'd actually be right. And with Excel, we can store data in a table-like form. We don't necessarily have the relational tables that we might have otherwise, but Excel actually supports SQL queries. And so once you get your data into a spreadsheet, you can actually practice your SQL using Excel to query it, which is kind of interesting. A lot of times when we need to take data from one database type to another, so we're going to go from MySQL to a Microsoft SQL or to Oracle or to yet another database type, we need kind of an intermediate step. And so we're going to export the data, and then we're going to import it again into another database. And so we can do that using XML. If you've not done the XML tutorial at the W3 schools, I highly recommend it. It will be 15 to 30 minutes well spent, and after that you should speak XML pretty well. An XML file is sometimes called a self-described file because the file itself describes itself. And so everything you need to know about the data that's contained in the file, the structure, the relationships, what are fields, what are records, and so on, is defined by the XML fields that surround the data. And so XML becomes a great way for us to import and export data. And so the other question becomes, what then is a flat file? And years ago, before we had databases, when we had to store information from one user session to the next, we'd use flat files. And so we just simply store a bunch of names or a bunch of addresses, or names and address in some kind of combination. And the people who wrote the application had to remember the order that we stored the data so they could retrieve it in the same order later. And so it was much more work, but we still use flat files a lot today. And when we create a word processing document, that gets stored in a file that we could kind of construe as a flat file. We could read, write, modify the file's contents. And so flat files are still widely used, but they're not as good to query. So databases are structured in a relational fashion to try and help us with the queries that we want to perform on later. So have a good whack at a lot of discussions within the discussion thread. I look forward to your feedback, and I'll see you in the thread.